When billionaire James Carter came home early and peeked through his son's bedroom door, what he saw made his blood run cold. His housekeeper was doing something she had absolutely no right to do. But when he discovered the truth about who she really was, it would change his family forever. Welcome to Voice of Granny. While you are here, please comment your view on the story and where you are watching from. Sometimes life has a way of showing us what we've been missing. And for James Carter, that moment came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when he decided to leave work early. James was the kind of man who had everything money could buy. A beautiful home in the suburbs of Atlanta, expensive cars in the garage, and a successful tech company that kept him busy 16 hours a day. But having everything doesn't mean you have what matters most. And James was about to learn that lesson in the hardest way possible. His son Tommy was 5 years old, a bright-eyed little boy who'd been born with cerebral palsy. The condition affected his legs mostly, made it hard for him to walk, hard for him to run and play like other kids. James loved his son, of course he did. But if we're being honest here, and I think we should be, James had let guilt swallow him whole. Every time he looked at Tommy struggling with his little walker, every time he saw those leg braces, James felt like he'd somehow failed as a father. So he did what a lot of people do when the pain gets too heavy. He buried himself in work. Meetings, conference calls, business trips. Anything to avoid sitting with that terrible, gnawing feeling that his son would never have a normal life. James had hired the best doctors money could buy. Physical therapists who charged $300 an hour. Specialists who flew in from other states. But Tommy remained sad, quiet, withdrawn. The spark that should light up a 5-year-old's eyes had dimmed to almost nothing. 6 months earlier, James had hired a housekeeper named Sarah Mitchell. She was a quiet woman in her early 30s, African-American, with kind eyes and gentle hands. She kept the house spotless, cooked meals that actually tasted like someone cared, and never complained about the long hours. James barely noticed her, if we're being truthful. She was just part of the household machinery that kept things running while he focused on important things. But on this particular Tuesday, James left the office at 3 in the afternoon instead of his usual 7. A client meeting had been canceled, and for once, he didn't fill that empty space with another obligation. He just went home. Walking through his front door, James heard something that made him stop dead in his tracks. It was laughter. Real, genuine, joyful laughter coming from Tommy's bedroom upstairs. His son hadn't laughed like that in months. Maybe longer. James climbed the stairs slowly, his heart pounding for reasons he couldn't name. Tommy's door was cracked open, and what James saw through that narrow gap made his blood run cold and hot at the same time. Sarah was on the floor with Tommy, but she wasn't just playing with him. She was holding his small legs, moving them in careful, deliberate patterns that looked exactly like professional physical therapy. Her hands moved with precision, supporting Tommy's muscles as she guided him through exercises James had seen doctors do in expensive clinics. "That's it, sweetheart," Sarah was saying softly, her voice full of encouragement. "You're getting so strong. I bet tomorrow you'll be able to hold it even longer." Tommy was concentrating hard, his little face scrunched up with effort. And then, James couldn't believe what he was seeing. Tommy lifted his leg on his own. Just a few inches, but he did it himself. The boy's face exploded into the biggest smile James had seen in forever. "I did it," Tommy shouted. "Miss Sarah, I did it. I knew you could, baby." "I knew it all along," Sarah said, clapping her hands with pure joy. James felt like someone had punched him in the chest. A storm of emotions crashed through him. Anger that this housekeeper was messing with his son's medical care without permission, confusion about where she'd learned these techniques, and something else. Something that felt uncomfortably like jealousy. This woman, who he barely acknowledged most days, had formed a bond with his son that James himself had failed to build. His wife, Jennifer, appeared beside him in the hallway. She was holding a cup of coffee and didn't seem surprised to see him home early. "Sarah's amazing with him," Jennifer whispered. "I've been watching for weeks now. Tommy's been improving in ways the doctors said wasn't possible." James turned to his wife, anger flashing in his eyes. "You knew. You knew she was doing this, and you didn't tell me." Jennifer met his gaze steadily. "I knew you'd react exactly like this. But James, look at our son. When's the last time you saw him smile like that? When's the last time you sat on the floor and just spent time with him?" The words hit harder than any business failure ever had. James wanted to argue, wanted to defend himself, but he couldn't. Because Jennifer was right. He'd been so busy running from his pain that he'd abandoned his son to deal with it alone. Inside the room, Tommy hugged Sarah tightly. Thank you, Miss Sarah. Tomorrow I'm going to walk 3 whole steps. You wait and see. James watched this woman, this housekeeper he'd barely noticed, kiss the top of his son's head with such tenderness it made his throat tight. And he realized something that shook him to his core. Someone he'd considered just an employee cared more about Tommy's happiness than he'd shown in months. Tomorrow, James decided he would get answers. He would find out exactly what Sarah Mitchell was doing in his house, and why she cared so much about a child who wasn't even hers. What James didn't know yet was that this discovery would change everything. Not just for Tommy, but for their entire family. Sometimes the people we overlook are exactly the ones we need most. And Sarah Mitchell was about to teach this successful, wealthy man the most important lesson of his life. James couldn't sleep that night. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying that scene over and over. Tommy's laughter. Sarah's gentle hands. The exercises that looked so professional, so skilled. Who was this woman really? By morning, James had worked himself into a state. He canceled all his meetings and waited at home, determined to confront Sarah the moment she arrived. When she walked through the door at 8 o'clock sharp, he was ready. Sarah, we need to talk, James said, his voice harder than he intended. It's about what I saw yesterday with Tommy. Sarah's face changed instantly. The easy smile she usually wore disappeared, replaced by something more guarded. Mr. Carter, I can explain. Explain what? That you're playing doctor with my son. James cut her off. You're a housekeeper, Sarah. You're not qualified to be doing physical therapy. What if you hurt him? What if you make things worse? The words came out harsh, cutting. James saw Sarah flinch, saw her hands start to tremble slightly. But there was something in her eyes that surprised him. Not fear exactly, but a quiet strength, like she was holding on to something important. I'm sorry, sir, Sarah said quietly. I didn't mean to overstep. I just wanted to help Tommy. Help him how? James demanded. Where did you learn those techniques? Physical therapists go to school for years. Sarah was silent for a long moment. James could see her struggling with something, weighing whether to speak or stay quiet. Finally, she took a breath and looked him straight in the eye. My little brother, she said simply. His name is Marcus. He was born with the same condition as Tommy. Cerebral palsy. Maybe even a little worse. James felt his anger stumble, trip over itself. I took care of Marcus for 12 years, Mr. Carter, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. My family didn't have money for expensive doctors and fancy clinics. So I learned. I spent hours in the public library reading medical textbooks. I watched YouTube videos of physical therapy sessions. I talked to every therapist who would give me 5 minutes. I taught myself because I had to, because Marcus needed me, and we had no other choice. And your brother? James asked, his voice softer now. What happened to him? For the first time, Sarah smiled, a real proud smile. Marcus is 17 now. He walks, he runs, he's on his high school basketball team. The doctors said he'd never leave a wheelchair. They said his condition was too severe. But they were wrong. The revelation hit James like a wave. This woman, who he'd dismissed as just hired help, had accomplished something extraordinary. She'd taken a child with severe disabilities and helped him achieve what doctors said was impossible. And she'd done it with nothing but determination, love, and countless hours of self-education. You still should have asked my permission, James said, but his voice had lost its edge. You're absolutely right, Sarah agreed. And I'm sorry. But Mr. Carter, can I be honest with you? James nodded, not trusting his voice. Tommy is so sad, Sarah said, and suddenly there were tears in her eyes. He's this beautiful, smart, amazing little boy, and he's heartbroken. I see him when nobody else is watching. I see him cry into his pillow. I see him look at other kids playing outside and just give up. And I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. Not when I know I could help. At that moment, Tommy came around the corner, moving on his walker. But James noticed something different. His son's posture was better, more confident. There was energy in his movement that hadn't been there before. Daddy, you're home again, Tommy said, his face lighting up. Miss Sarah, can I show Daddy what we practiced? Tommy, go to your room, James said automatically. The grown-ups are talking. He watched his son's smile die like a candle being snuffed out. Tommy's shoulders slumped as he turned away. Wait, Sarah said gently, bending down to Tommy's level. How about you go to the living room and practice your sitting exercises? I'll come help you in just a minute, okay? Tommy nodded, his smile returning partially, and headed off. After he left, Sarah turned back to James. Mr. Carter, I know you see me as just your housekeeper. And maybe that's all I am. But your son is getting better, and you know it. Better? I saw him for 10 minutes yesterday, James shot back. I've been with him every day for 6 months, Sarah said, her voice rising with passion. I see him when he thinks nobody's watching. I see him try so hard not to disappoint those expensive therapists you hire. I see a brave, incredible kid who just needs someone to believe in him. Her words struck something deep in James's chest. Guilt flooded through him. When was the last time he'd really looked at Tommy? Not just glanced at him, but really seen him? My methods might not be as fancy as what you pay for, Sarah continued. But they come from love. Real love. And sometimes, Mr. Carter, that makes all the difference in the world. James wanted to argue. His pride was wounded, his authority questioned. But he couldn't deny what his own eyes had seen. Tommy happy, Tommy laughing, Tommy making progress. I need time to think about this, James finally said. Sarah nodded. Of course, sir. And if you want me to stop, I will. But please, don't let Tommy think he did something wrong. He's worked so hard. Over the next few days, James found himself watching Sarah in a completely different way. He started noticing things he'd missed before. She arrived an hour early every morning, time she wasn't paid for. She stayed late, working with Tommy after her shift ended. On her lunch break, instead of resting, she was researching new exercises and techniques on her phone. James had security cameras throughout the house. He started watching the footage from Tommy's room. What he saw amazed him. Sarah had turned his son's bedroom into a mini therapy center. She used pillows for balance exercises, resistance bands made from old clothing, bottles filled with Rice's weights. Every household item became a tool for Tommy's recovery. But what struck James most was the notebook. Sarah kept a detailed journal of Tommy's progress, what worked, what didn't, how Tommy felt each day. It was more thorough than any medical report James had ever received from the high-priced specialists. One entry made James's eyes water. Tommy cried today because he couldn't do the leg lift. I told him crying doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're trying hard enough to care. Tomorrow will be better. I believe in him even when he doesn't believe in himself. James realized something that shook him. This woman wasn't just helping his son's body heal. She was healing his spirit. And that was something no amount of money could buy. James couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Sarah's story. Her techniques were too precise, her knowledge too deep. So he did something he wasn't proud of. He decided to follow her after work. On Thursday evening, Sarah left the Carter house at 6 o'clock as usual. James waited a few minutes, then followed in his car, staying far enough back that she wouldn't notice. She took 2 buses, traveling almost an hour to a neighborhood on the other side of Atlanta. The houses here were smaller, more worn. But they were well kept, with flowers and window boxes and kids playing in yards. Sarah walked to a modest house with a neat lawn and went inside. James parked down the street and waited, feeling increasingly foolish. What was he doing, spying on his housekeeper like some kind of detective? But then Sarah came back out, and James understood. With her was a teenage boy, tall, athletic, with the same warm smile as Sarah. He walked with the slightest limp, but moved with confidence and grace. This had to be Marcus. James watched as they walked to a nearby park. Marcus joined a pickup basketball game with other teenagers. And James couldn't believe what he was seeing. This young man, who supposedly had severe cerebral palsy, was running, jumping, shooting hoops. He wasn't just participating, he was good. Really good. Marcus drove past a defender, went up for a layup and scored. His teammates cheered. And on the sideline, Sarah watched with pure pride on her face. James got out of his car and approached the court. When Sarah saw him, her eyes went wide with surprise and worry. Mr. Carter? What are you doing here? I followed you, James admitted. I'm sorry. I wanted to understand. Sarah stood up, clearly uncomfortable. Sir, this is my private time. I know, and I shouldn't be here. James looked at the court where Marcus was playing. But I needed to see. Is that him? Is that Marcus? Sarah nodded, her expression softening. That's my little brother. They watched together as Marcus stole the ball and dribbled down the court. He moved like water, like the disability had never touched him. The doctor said he'd never walk without assistance, Sarah said quietly. They said his case was too severe, that we should focus on making him comfortable, not on recovery. But I didn't accept that. I couldn't. How did you do it? James asked. Love, Sarah said simply. And refusal to give up. Every single day, even when he cried and said he couldn't do it. Even when I was exhausted from working 2 jobs to keep food on the table. Even when it seemed impossible. I just kept believing in him until he could believe in himself. The game ended and Marcus jogged over, sweaty and grinning. When he saw James, he extended his hand politely. "You must be Mr. Carter," Marcus said. "Sarah talks about you guys all the time. How's Tommy doing?" James paused, choosing his words carefully. "He's doing better than he has in a long time. Thanks to your sister." Marcus's grin grew wider. "Sarah's amazing. She saved my life, man. For real." "Marcus, why don't you go get cleaned up?" Sarah suggested. "I'll be home soon." After Marcus left, Sarah turned to James. "Mr. Carter, I'm sorry if I've crossed a line. I know Tommy's your son, and I had no right to." "Stop," James interrupted. "Just stop apologizing. I'm the one who needs to apologize to you." Sarah looked confused. "I judged you," James continued. "I saw you as just the help. Just someone who cleaned and cooked and didn't matter beyond that. But you're so much more. You have a gift, Sarah. A real gift for helping children like Tommy. Like Marcus." "Thank you, sir, but—" "There's something I need to know," James said. "And I want the complete truth. Do you have any formal training? Any certifications?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. James could see her debating internally, weighing whether to reveal something she'd kept hidden. Finally, she sighed. "Yes, I have a degree in physical therapy. I graduated 3 years ago from Georgia State University. Full academic scholarship." James felt like the ground had shifted under his feet. "You're a licensed physical therapist? And you're working as a housekeeper? Why?" Sarah's laugh was bitter. "Because nobody will hire me, Mr. Carter. I sent my resume to every clinic, every hospital, every rehab center in Atlanta. You know what they told me? That I didn't have experience in appropriate clinical settings. That I didn't fit their organizational culture. They never said it was because I'm a black woman from the poor side of town with a state school degree instead of some fancy private university. But that's what they meant." The shame hit James like a punch. How many times had he hired people based on where they went to school? Based on who they knew? Based on whether they looked like they fit in with his company culture? "So you took the housekeeping job," James said quietly. "I needed to work. And then I met Tommy." Sarah's eyes grew distant. "The first day I was here, I saw him sitting by the window, watching other kids play outside. He looked so lonely, so defeated. And I knew I could help him, even if it meant doing it secretly." At that moment, James's phone buzzed. It was a text from Jennifer. "Come home. Tommy wants to show you something important." "I need to go," James said. "But Sarah, this conversation isn't over." Not by a long shot. When James got home, he found Tommy in the living room. His son stood up from the couch without using his hands to push himself up, without reaching for his walker. Tommy stood on his own 2 feet, wobbly but determined. "Daddy, watch," Tommy said, his voice full of excitement and fear. And then, in front of James and Jennifer, Tommy took a step. Then another. Then one more. 3 steps without any support, without any help. It wasn't much, but it was everything. James dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face. Tommy walked into his father's arms, and James held his son like he'd never let go. "You did it, buddy," James whispered. "You did it." "Miss Sarah said I could," Tommy replied. "She said I just had to believe real hard." Over Tommy's shoulder, James looked at Jennifer. His wife's face was wet with tears too. And in that moment, James knew exactly what he had to do. Sarah Mitchell had given him the most precious gift in the world, his son's future. And it was time to give her something back. The next morning, James asked Sarah to meet him in his home office. She came in nervously, probably expecting to be fired for keeping her credentials secret. But James had spent all night thinking, planning, and making phone calls. "Sarah, sit down, please," James said, gesturing to a chair. She sat, her hands folded in her lap, waiting. "I've been a fool," James began. "I've been so wrapped up in my own guilt and pain that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. You came into my home, and you gave my son something I couldn't give him with all my money and connections. You gave him hope. Mr. Carter." "Let me finish," James said gently. "Yesterday I watched Tommy walk. Actually walk. Do you know what the doctors told me when he was born? They said he'd need leg braces his whole life. They said he'd always need assistance. But you didn't accept that. You saw possibilities where everyone else saw limitations." Sarah's eyes were glistening with tears. I also know about your community work, James continued. Sarah's head snapped up in surprise. I had my assistant do some research, James admitted. The Hope Center Community Rehabilitation Clinic. You volunteer there 3 nights a week, don't you? Working with kids who can't afford therapy. How did you? It doesn't matter how I know. What matters is this. You're a trained physical therapist who's been wasting her talent because people couldn't see past their prejudices to recognize what you have to offer. And I'm going to change that. James pulled out a folder and handed it to Sarah. This is a contract. I'm hiring you as Tommy's full-time physical therapist. The salary is listed on page 2. It's 5 times what I'm paying you now. You'll work regular hours, you'll have health insurance, retirement benefits, and 2 weeks of paid vacation. Sarah opened the folder with shaking hands. When she saw the salary number, she gasped. Mr. Carter, I can't. This is too much. It's not enough, James said firmly. But there's more. That Hope Center where you volunteer? I've purchased the building next door. We're going to expand it, renovate it, and turn it into a proper rehabilitation clinic. And you're going to run it. What? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. The Mitchell Community Therapy Center, James said. I want you to build the clinic you always wished existed. State-of-the-art equipment, qualified staff, and free services for families who can't afford private care. I'll provide the funding and the administrative support. You provide the vision and the expertise. Sarah was crying now, full tears streaming down her face. Why would you do this for me? Because it's not for you, James said. It's for Tommy and Marcus and all the other kids out there who deserve a chance. It's also for me, Sarah. I need to do this. I need to make up for being blind for so long. Before Sarah could respond, Tommy burst into the office, with Jennifer right behind him. Daddy, Mommy said Miss Sarah might go away. Tommy said, his face filled with panic. Please don't make her leave. James knelt down to his son's level. Miss Sarah's not going anywhere, buddy. In fact, she's going to be spending even more time with you. How would you feel about that? Tommy's face transformed with joy. He turned and hugged Sarah tight. You're staying? Really and truly. Really and truly, Sarah said, her voice choked with emotion. Jennifer came over and put her hand on Sarah's shoulder. Welcome to the family, because that's what you are now. Family. 3 months later, the transformation was complete. Not just of the clinic, but of the entire Carter family. Sarah now arrived at the house at 9 in the morning, not as a housekeeper, but as Tommy's dedicated therapist. They worked together for 3 hours each day, but it didn't feel like work. It felt like play, like adventure, like 2 people determined to prove the impossible was possible. The Mitchell Community Therapy Center opened its doors on a Saturday morning in June. The building was beautiful, bright, welcoming, filled with equipment and hope. James had hired a full staff, 2 additional physical therapists, an occupational therapist, a speech therapist, and a child psychologist. They would serve the community for free, funded entirely by James's donation. At the opening ceremony, over 100 people showed up. Parents with children in wheelchairs, kids with walkers, families who'd been told there was no hope. Sarah stood at the podium, Marcus beside her, and addressed the crowd. When my brother was little, Sarah began, the doctors gave up on him. They told us to accept his limitations. But we didn't accept it. We believed in something bigger. We believed that with love, dedication, and hard work, anything is possible. The crowd applauded, but Sarah held up her hand. This clinic exists because of a man who was brave enough to admit he was wrong, Sarah continued, looking at James. Mr. James Carter saw past his own prejudices and recognized that help can come from unexpected places. He taught me that it's never too late to change, never too late to become better than we were. James felt his throat tighten. Jennifer squeezed his hand. But most of all, Sarah said, this clinic exists for every child who's been told they can't. Every kid who's been counted out. Every family that's been forgotten. This is your place. This is where miracles happen. Tommy, who was standing with his parents, suddenly broke free and walked, yes, walked, to the podium. He climbed the steps carefully, and Sarah helped him up to the microphone. My name is Tommy Carter, the 6-year-old said into the microphone. A year ago, I couldn't walk. I was sad all the time. But Miss Sarah taught me that I could do anything if I believed hard enough. And now I can walk and run. And I even played soccer last week. The crowd erupted in applause. Parents were crying, kids were cheering. It was a moment of pure, beautiful hope. After the ceremony, James found Sarah in one of the therapy rooms, looking out the window at the children playing in the new playground. "Thank you," James said simply. "For what?" Sarah asked. "For not giving up on Tommy when I had. For seeing him when I was too blind to look. For teaching me that the measure of a person has nothing to do with their job title or bank account." Sarah smiled. "You taught me something too, Mr. Carter." "What's that?" "That people can change. That hearts can open. That it's never too late to do the right thing." They stood together, watching Tommy play with other children. His movements weren't perfect, but they were his own. He was running, laughing, living. And that was everything. 2 years after that opening ceremony, the Mitchell Community Therapy Center had become something nobody could have imagined. Sarah had helped over 300 children. Her methods, combining scientific technique with genuine love and creativity, had attracted attention from medical journals and universities. She'd been interviewed on local news, then national news. Other cities were reaching out, asking how to replicate her model. But for Sarah, the numbers didn't matter. What mattered was sitting on the therapy room floor with a scared 7-year-old, telling them the same thing she'd told Marcus, the same thing she'd told Tommy. "I believe in you, even when you don't believe in yourself." Tommy, now 8 years old, had become something special. He walked without any assistance. He ran, he played sports, he was just like any other kid. But he was also different in one important way. He had extraordinary compassion. He understood what it meant to struggle, what it meant to feel different, what it meant to overcome. Tommy started a program at his school called Friends First. He'd visit classrooms and talk about his journey. He'd explain cerebral palsy in simple terms kids could understand. And he'd always end with the same message. Being different doesn't mean being less. It means being you. One afternoon, James came home from work. He was working fewer hours now, had promoted someone else to CEO so he could focus on what really mattered, and found Tommy in the garage. His son was building something with wood and tools. "What are you making, buddy?" James asked. "A walker," Tommy said. "But a cool one. See, I'm painting it with racing stripes and adding stickers. There's a new kid at school, Amy, and she uses a walker. But hers is boring and old. I thought if I made her a cool one, she might not feel so bad about using it." James felt his heart swell with pride. This was what Sarah had given them. Not just physical healing, but a transformation of the spirit. Tommy had learned empathy, kindness, and the power of using your own struggles to help others. "That's a really great idea," James said. "Want some help?" Together, father and son worked on the walker. They talked and laughed, and James realized these moments, these simple, ordinary moments, were what he'd been missing for so long. Success and money meant nothing if you couldn't sit in a garage with your kid and build something together. Later that week, the Carter family attended a special event at the therapy center. It was Marcus's high school graduation, and he'd asked to have the party at the center that had become a second home to him. Marcus stood before the crowd of family, friends, and the kids he'd helped mentor at the center. He wore his cap and gown, and in his hand was a basketball. The same one he'd been shooting hoops with when James first followed Sarah to the park. "When I was little," Marcus began, "I heard the word can't a lot. Can't walk. Can't run. Can't play. Can't have a normal life. And I believed it for a while. But my sister Sarah never accepted that word. She showed me that can't is just an excuse people use when they don't want to try hard enough." He looked at Sarah, who was crying in the front row. "Sarah, you saved my life. Not just my body, but my soul. You taught me that I was stronger than my limitations. And now I want to do the same thing for other kids." Marcus held up an acceptance letter. "I've been accepted to Georgia State University. I'm going to study physical therapy, just like Sarah. And when I graduate, I'm coming back here to work at this center. Because this is where miracles happen. This is where kids learn they're more than their diagnoses." The applause was thunderous. James looked around at all the faces in that room. Parents who'd been told their children would never improve, kids who'd been written off, families who'd found hope in this place. And he realized that this was his real legacy. Not his company, not his money, but this community of healing and hope. After the ceremony, James found a quiet moment with Sarah. "I've been thinking about something," James said. "The Mitchell Center has been so successful here. What if we expanded? What if we opened centers in other cities?" Sarah's eyes widened. "Mr. Carter." "James. After all this time, please just call me James." Sarah smiled. "James, that would be amazing. But it would be expensive." "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," James replied. I've spent my whole career building a tech company. It made me rich, but it didn't make me happy. Helping families like ours, this is what I was supposed to be doing all along. I just needed you to show me the way. We'd need to find the right people to run the other centers, Sarah said thoughtfully. People who understand that this isn't just about exercises and techniques. It's about believing in these kids. We'll find them, James said confidently. And you'll train them. You'll teach them the Sarah Mitchell method. Over the next year, they opened 3 more Mitchell centers in Birmingham, Charlotte, and Nashville. Each one was staffed with therapists who Sarah personally trained. Each one served families for free, funded by James's foundation. And each one transformed lives. Tommy became a junior ambassador for the centers. He'd travel with Sarah to the openings, talking to kids about his journey. He was 9 years old and already changing the world. One evening, the whole extended family gathered at the Carter home for dinner. Sarah and Marcus were there, along with Jennifer's parents and some of the staff from the original center. It had become their tradition. Sunday dinners where everyone was family, where job titles didn't matter, where love was the only requirement for a seat at the table. As they sat around the table, Jennifer raised her glass. I want to make a toast. 2 years ago, we were a broken family. We had money, we had a nice house, but we were broken. And then Sarah walked into our lives disguised as someone we didn't think was important. She showed us what really matters. James stood up, taking Sarah's hand. Sarah Mitchell, you changed everything. You healed my son, you healed my family, and you taught me the most important lesson I've ever learned. That the people we overlook, the people we dismiss as unimportant, they're often the ones carrying the greatest gifts. You were an angel who came into our lives when we needed you most. Sarah was crying, but she was smiling too. I came here looking for a job, and I found a family. I found purpose. I found home. Tommy stood on his chair, something he couldn't have done 2 years ago, and raised his juice box. To Miss Sarah, the best friend ever. Everyone laughed and clinked glasses. And in that moment, surrounded by love and laughter, James understood something profound. Success wasn't measured in dollars or business deals. It was measured in this, in healed hearts and transformed lives, in a little boy who could run and dream and believe in himself. The story of James Carter and Sarah Mitchell spread far beyond Atlanta. It became a reminder that help comes from unexpected places, that we should never judge people by their job title or social status, that love and dedication can achieve what money alone never could. The Mitchell Centers continued to grow, helping thousands of children across the country. But the original center in Atlanta remained special. It was where it all started, where a wealthy man learned humility, where a talented woman got the recognition she deserved, where a little boy learned to walk and to dream. And every Sunday night, no matter how busy they got, the Carter Mitchell family gathered around that dinner table. Because they'd learned the most important lesson of all, that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who shows up, who stays, who believes in you when you've stopped believing in yourself. Tommy is 12 now. He plays soccer, he runs track, and he still visits the therapy center regularly to encourage younger kids. He tells them his story, shows them his old leg braces that are now retired in his closet, and he always ends with the same words Sarah told him years ago. I believe in you, even when you don't believe in yourself. You're going to do amazing things. I can see it already. And you know what? He's usually right. Just like Sarah was right about him. Just like she's been right about hundreds of other kids who were told they couldn't, they wouldn't, they'd never be able to. Sometimes miracles happen in unexpected ways, through unexpected people. Sometimes the person you need most comes into your life disguised as someone you almost overlooked. James Carter learned that lesson, and it changed everything. Sarah Mitchell taught a wealthy man that true value has nothing to do with money or status. She showed a broken family how to heal. She proved that when you combine knowledge with love, when you refuse to accept the word impossible, when you believe in someone with your whole heart, that's when real miracles happen. The Mitchell Centers continue to grow, touching more lives every year. But the real miracle isn't in the buildings or the equipment. It's in the little moments, a child taking their first independent step, a parent crying tears of joy, a kid who was told never, proving everyone wrong. And at the heart of it all is a simple truth that Sarah knew from the very beginning. Every child deserves someone who believes in them. Every family deserves hope. And every person, no matter who they are or where they come from, has gifts to offer this world if we're willing to see them. James looks back now at that Tuesday afternoon when he came home early and heard his son's laughter. That was the day his life split into before and after. Before Sarah, he was rich but empty. After Sarah, he understood what wealth really meant. It meant Tommy running across a soccer field. It meant Sunday dinners filled with laughter. It meant watching Sarah train a new generation of therapists who would carry her message of hope to other cities, other families, other children who needed to hear that they were capable of amazing things. It meant knowing that he'd finally done something that mattered. Not building a company or making money, but building a legacy of love and healing that would continue long after he was gone. And on those Sunday nights, when everyone gathered around the table, James would look at Sarah, this remarkable woman who'd walked into his life as a housekeeper and become family, and he'd feel gratitude so deep it made his chest ache. Because she'd given him everything that mattered. She'd given him back his son. She'd given him back himself. Sometimes the greatest teachers come from the most unexpected places. Sometimes the wisest people are the ones we almost didn't notice. Sometimes miracles wear an apron and carry a mop, and we're too blind to see the angel standing right in front of us. But when we finally open our eyes, when we finally recognize the gift we've been given, everything changes. Everything becomes possible. And that's when life truly begins. This is the story of James Carter and Sarah Mitchell. But really, it's the story of all of us, of how we need each other, how we can heal each other, how love and belief can overcome anything. It's a reminder to look closer at the people around you, to see past titles and positions and recognize the humanity, the gifts, the potential in everyone you meet. Because you never know when an angel might walk through your door, ready to change your life forever. You just have to be willing to see them. The end. If this story touched your heart, remember, the Sarah Mitchells of the world are all around us. They're the people working quietly, helping others, making a difference without seeking recognition. Take a moment today to really see someone you might have overlooked. To thank someone whose work you've taken for granted. To recognize that every person you meet is carrying gifts you might need. Because sometimes the person who will change your life is right in front of you, waiting to be seen.